Hello, everybody. Welcome to Very Online, Navigating Social Media and Digital Technologies with Wisdom and Grace. My name is Travis Pickell, and I am Associate Director of University Engagement at Anselm House. If any of you joining us tonight are new to Anselm House and our mission of connecting Christian faith and knowledge with all of life at the University of Minnesota, I welcome you to visit us at anselmhouse.org or click on the link in the chat that will be there just shortly to learn more about us. Tonight, we want to explore how the advent of digital technology, and especially the smartphone, is impacting the way we spend our time, the way we relate to one another, and the way we understand ourselves. As with all novel technologies, digital tech and smartphones are bringing a number of changes, both good and bad, mixed results, and ways that we're only beginning to understand. There's no easy narratives of utopian progress or pessimistic decline. Yet, unless we're clear-eyed about the impacts of our use of technology and the increasingly pervasive tools that we use, we might be surprised where they take us and once it's too late to do anything about us. So we're really excited about this conversation. It's a very important topic. We're very glad you guys are with us tonight. The conversation tonight promises to be in many ways a wonderful example of the sort of inquiry that Anselm House seeks to cultivate within the university setting. Both of our panelists tonight are going to draw upon a wealth of rigorous research and scholarship in order to speak to one of the big questions of our day, the formative impact of our everyday use of developing technologies in its social, political, and spiritual dimensions. Coming from different disciplinary perspectives, they'll address this common theme in their own way, but they'll both do so with an openness to the profound importance of the question for human flourishing and for the common good. In just a few minutes, we're going to begin, and I'll start with some introductions of both panelists. I do want to go ahead and invite everybody who's viewing tonight to make use of the Q&A and chat functions. Please do participate and offer any questions that you have as they're speaking. We'll transition to a time of question and answer with the audience in the second half of our program. So without further ado, let me go ahead and introduce our panelists. We'll begin with Jean Twenge, who is professor of psychology at San Diego State University and the author of this book, iGen: Why Today's Super Connected Kids Are Growing Up Less Rebellious, More Tolerant, Less Happy, and Completely Unprepared for Adulthood. And we'll get a chance to talk about that full title throughout the program. She's also written a handful of other books and textbooks, and her work is regularly featured in major news outlets and television networks nationally. And she's given a very nice TED Talk that we'd invite you guys to check out. Welcome, Jean. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Thanks very much. I wish I could be right there with you in Minnesota since it's my native state.
We wish we could have you. It's actually above freezing today, which is a very a good thing. Next, let me introduce Matthew Pittman. Matthew is Assistant Professor of Advertising and Public Relations in the College of Communications and Information at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville, where he teaches about social media, pro-social strategic communication, and message framing and design. In other words, he does a lot of work understanding how people can be persuaded to make good decisions in the emerging media environment. Welcome, Matt.
Hey, Travis. Hey, everybody. I am quite content to be in the South right now. So
That's great. Well, let's just go ahead and kick it off with the questions. I would love to start, since I shared the cover of your book, Jean, maybe we could start there. It is a great conversation starter. I wonder if you might just give us tell us a little bit about the story, about how you came to write it. We'd love to know about your research in the shift from the millennial generation into what comes after the millennial generation, which you've called iGen. And for those who haven't read the book, maybe you could just tell us a little bit about how social psychologists tend to study generational differences and what it was that tipped you off that some generational change was occurring.
Yeah, so I've been doing this work on generational differences for a long time, since I was an undergraduate myself. the past 10 years or so, that's mostly meant, look at these big national surveys, usually of young people, and kind of keeping an eye on, you know, pretty much everything, like how young people spend their time, what's important to them, how they're feeling. And in the data that was rolling in for 2012, 2013, more and more high school students entering college students were saying that they felt like they couldn't do anything right, or that they didn't enjoy life. These are classic symptoms of depression. More were saying they were unhappy. More were saying that they felt lonely and left out. And when these first started to show up, I thought it might be a blip, you know, a year or two here or there, you know, it happens. But then it kept going and kept going, which made me have to try to wonder, well, what was going on? And it wasn't the Great Recession, because the US economy was improving between 2012 and until right before the pandemic. And it was hard to think of any one event that happened in 2012 or around that and then kept going in the same direction. But then I came across a poll from the Pew Center that showed end of 2012, that was the first time that the majority of Americans owned a smartphone. And then digging more into that data, there are also some interesting trends around social media, that around that time, social media moved from being something about half of teens were doing every day to something more than 3 out of 4 were doing every day. You hit that tipping point, and if you're not on social media, you're left out. And if you are on social media, you feel FOMO and you're left out. So it's like you can't win. So there's all these forces going on there. And, you know, smartphones are great. Social media can be great. There's some very clear positives in these technologies. And I don't ever want to, you know, let go of that reality. But when you think about, you know, someone my age, I'm a Gen Xer, and I imagine, you know, I think back to being in middle school, being in high school, and socially how difficult that can be. And then I think about, well, what if that embarrassing picture that I still remember from 1986 was on social media and everybody was making fun of it? And then you start to take that perspective and realize that this is having a really big impact on this generation because of some of the stuff that's going on online. And then other trends started to show up too. They were also sleeping less, maybe because it's so tempting to be on the phone, and spending less time with each other face to face, even before the pandemic. So there's all of these kind of trends that are intertwined with each other. And they all point toward the impact of technology. And some of that is positive, but for mental health, not entirely positive. There seem to be some of these negative trends that have accompanied the rise of the smartphone and social media.
That's great. One of the things that I noticed in your book, Jean, which I've noticed in other areas as well, is that there are a number of sort of unexpected effects of social media that we might even say they're sort of paradoxes. One that has a little bit to do with what you're talking about now, to me, had to do with why people are on social media in the first place. You know, they want to stay connected with their friends. They want to be part of something bigger. They want to belong. But at the same time, there seems to be a paradox that in general terms, as the use of social media increases, loneliness does not seem, by the data, to decrease.
In fact,
overall.
it increases by quite a bit.
Yeah, so maybe you could just help us understand what's going on there. And I know, Matt, you've done some research on this as well. So, you know, help us understand why the paradox. And then there's a couple other paradoxes I want us to get into as well. But, you know, let's start with loneliness and happiness and the use of smartphones and social media.
Yeah, so I think some of it is you have to ask the right question in the right way to get the answer that you're looking for. So if you think about individuals, generally speaking, the people who spend a lot of time on social media also spend a lot of time with their friends face to face. And we're talking, you know, 2019 and before. But that's people who are social. You know, in high school, everybody remembers the person who kind of majored in their social life. that's how it works. And then there's other people who are just not as social. They spend their time in other ways. Maybe they're spending more time on homework. Maybe they're spending time working at a paid job or doing extracurriculars or whatever. So when you look at the relationship to loneliness, one reason that you get some interesting results is that the folks who are spending a lot of time on social media are often the same ones who have an active social life in person. And that tends to be good for mitigating loneliness. So you have to take that into account. How much are they seeing people in person? And we did that in one of our papers. We found that the people who were the least lonely were those who spent a lot of time with their friends in person, a little less time on social media. And the most lonely were the ones who spent less time in person and more on social media. So, and then the other two groups are kind of in the middle. So there's that piece first, that you can't just make a blanket statement like, oh, lots of time on social media leads to loneliness, because it depends. It depends on how it's balanced with in-person interaction. Mm-hmm. And then the next piece that helps resolve the paradox a little bit is there's a difference between talking about how loneliness and social media use relates among individuals and thinking about it in terms of the group or in terms of the generation. Because when I've talked to a lot of college students about this, and I hear all the time, well, you know, if I'm on social media, then I see, you know, all the things my friends are doing without me. And then if I'm not on social media, then I'm completely left out. And I remember one college freshman saying at this group discussion that we had, he said, you can't win. It's like you lose either way. And I think that is one reason why you see that rise in loneliness in the age of smartphones and social media, is that you feel like you're left out no matter what you do. But it is paradoxical. I mean, Facebook advertises their site as you'll never be lonely again. You can always be connected. And it has that appeal. But you can also feel disconnected for other reasons. And is connecting on social media as good as being with someone in person? It's not. And I think that's pretty clear. And it's definitely not as good for mental health. So I know Matt has some great research on this too. So
those Facebook ads always seem to come out at the worst time too, like right after the right, or some data breach, bad PR. Right. And you see an ad on TV like, we bring people together. Like, no, you do a lot more than that. Yeah, you know, when I was a youth pastor, the joke was that no matter what question I or the pastor asks, the answer can always be like Jesus. Like, well, yeah, you can argue Jesus because Jesus something else. The answer with this stuff is almost always, it depends, which you just said like 2 minutes ago. So it depends on who's using it, the individual differences in personality, right? Extroverts need more. I'm an extrovert, so I need that stimulation, like coffee. Yeah. Whiskey. Sure. Road trip. I'm in.
Not at the same time.
Depends on.
Yeah, not at the same time.
Not at the same time. In that order: coffee, road trip, whiskey. Yeah. Yeah. What platform you're using? Who you're connecting with? Are you using it to supplement your real world relationships? People you know from class, from work, your family? Or are you following celebrities with, you know, perfect lives, perfect bodies? Yeah, the upward and downward social comparison, I'm sure we'll talk about that. But yeah, it depends on who's using it and how they use it.
Why don't you actually, would love to hear more about the upward, downward social comparison. Will you expound on that?
So almost everything, it was really nice. I've been listening to iGen on audiobook the last week and a half driving around. And so all my research has been the last couple of years, but I feel like it's kind of a snapshot. So it was really nice to read iGen and get, like, Jean has a large, like, macro big lens picture scope. So based on your own personality, we can use social media in different ways. So I can follow like Zac Efron or The Rock on Instagram and see them working out and they're super in shape. I can engage in upward social comparison, and which is like literally looking up like, man, I'm never going to have abs like that. I'm fat, I'm gross, I'm depressed, boom, I'm down in the depths. But there's also downward social comparison where you're looking down. So I can look at those same accounts and be like, oh man, they're so controlled by their money. Like there's nothing deep going on. Those guys are stupid. So the ways we compare ourselves to, and comparison's almost never good, right? They both have their drawbacks, but yeah, how we are comparing ourselves to the people online matters. And students know this. I think they know they're living in this weird world where stuff's like kind of real. It is real. It's not real. She did go to Baja and eat tacos on the beach, like in a bathing suit. Yeah, that did happen, but that's also not every day. The thing that I think of when I think about students, the first paper I published on this, I think I put at the beginning, I put a quote from an Arcade Fire song, which was, all the kids have always known the emperor wears no clothes, but they bow down to him anyway, because it's better than being alone. Yep. So it's like a fake currency that we all agree to trade in because it's better than being alone. Yeah.
That's super helpful. Another paradox maybe we'll shift to that I've thought a little bit about has to do with how we think about the apps that we use as products that we consume. I think it's really interesting that we imagine that they're sort of there for us and that we are deriving a lot out of them because we tend to go back to the same ones and we have our favorites. But at the same time, they're all free to us. And there is this interesting sort of question that comes out, which is, if they're not necessarily, we think that they're there to serve us, but perhaps there's more going on to meet the eye than meets the eye. So I wonder if, especially Matt, you working in where you do in the university, but Jean, you might have thoughts on this as well, is thinking about the various interests that are typically embedded in the social media platforms that we use and what impact this might have on our approach to utilizing them. So you can get as specific or general as you want, but it seems paradoxical that they seem like a product that we consume, but in many ways, we are the product.
Yeah, if you don't pay for the product, you are the product. I'm sure a couple months ago, The Social Dilemma was big on Netflix, right? It was trending. I'm sure a lot of us watched that, which made good points, but it also had its problems. But one helpful thing to think about in one of the bells that I will ring here and with my students is, before you open up an app, decide what you're using it for. Even if it's like, I'm going to the bathroom and I'm going to kill 2 minutes. Great. Say that out loud. I'm going to go, I'm going to look at stupid, funny memes and laugh. Okay. But knowing what do the apps want? And if you're not paying for it, then what they want is your gaze and your attention for as long as possible. So knowing that, most of us have a little bit of reactance, like stick it to the manness, like, all right, fine. Well, if they want that, I'm not going to give it to them. But then we probably will anyway.
Yeah, because they're free in terms of you don't have to pay money, but you pay with your time and attention. Mm-hmm. And they are designed to keep you coming back as often as possible for as long as possible, because that's how they make the most money. And we kind of have to keep that in mind. And it doesn't mean never use it, but it means be more mindful about how you use it and when.
It does seem like there's a couple of themes, Jean, that I'm remembering from your book. One is sort of the idea of opportunity cost and time. There were ways, to the degree that we're spending time in digital technology in various ways, we're generally not spending them in other ways. So we're giving up something else that we might otherwise be doing. And then the other one that seems really interesting to me, and I can't remember if you really talked about it directly, but the idea of just sort of compulsion and addiction in this, and the way in which the sort of psychology deals with that. I don't know if is there much research out there on sort of compulsion and addiction and its relationship to sort of general use of smartphones?
Well, there's not enough, but what we do have points in the general direction that, say, using social media lights up the dopamine pathway, similar to other pleasurable things in life. It does seem to fulfill some needs for us for likes and status and connection and so on. But there's a ton of debate over whether it is truly addictive. It is remarkable how many people talk about their phones and social media with the language of addiction. And it is clear a lot of people feel a compulsion around it. There is something about it that makes it difficult to look away, that makes it difficult to stay away for long periods of time, probably mostly from FOMO and just thinking you're going to miss something. Where people are going to be talking about me and I don't know what they're going to be saying or things like that. And then briefly on the opportunity cost question, it's known as displacement. And for a long time, it was considered, well, basically, especially in communications, people said displacement didn't exist. And I think that's because, like I said earlier, the people who spend a lot of time with friends in person are also spending time on social media and vice versa, because there's individual differences. But when you look over time, over generations, that's where you do absolutely see displacement, because considering the amount of time that young people and frankly everybody now spends with screens, well, they weren't doing that in 1980. So what else were they doing? There's clearly been displacement at the generational level. I think you can't really debate that, even though at the individual level, it's somewhat more debatable.
So maybe I'll venture one more paradox.
Oh wait, real quick. When Jean said people aren't talking about us, I'm like, yeah, I think that's your fear when you're in your teens and 20s, and when you get older, we still can be addicted, but it's not the same. It's more like, well, I'm sure we've all had this experience where you go to open up an app and you're like, oh my God, I was looking at this 15 seconds ago when I forgot, and there was nothing there then, and there's nothing there now. That's when you know it's time to reevaluate your digital habits.
Yep.
I don't know what you're talking about. So one more potential paradox I'll float out there to you guys and see what you have to say about it. This one has to do, I think, with politics and public life, or maybe civil society, civil discourse. I'm thinking about how, in my experience, when I go to social media platforms like Twitter, I'm going there for information and news. In this context, I generally hope to discover something new, or also potentially to share something that I think adds to the public discourse and maybe helps people understand something in the world. But even I can see that there are generally patterns of what I'm exposed to in that platform. There seems to be what I've heard called a filter bubble that begins eventually to feel like an echo chamber. So I guess I'm feeling a little bit like Twitter isn't as public as I make it out to be when I'm going there. Do you think it's possible to escape that situation in the way our sort of media environment is set up?
Yeah, that's a tough thing, right? We're all siloed, and most people tend to follow people who they agree with or know or have something in common with. I think people can make a concerted effort on Twitter, for example, to follow people who are different from them politically, because then you can learn something about somebody else's perspective and you won't always be exposed to the same things. So I think it is worth that effort. I've made a concerted effort to do that. I have no idea if I've actually succeeded, but it is very interesting for me to see what both sides are saying.
In the future, yeah, you say, is it possible? Like, sure, yeah, like it's possible. One way there might be, I think Twitter just launched like a safe mode where you turn off all the crazy mean stuff. So I don't know if that's it, but I think one possible, because sometimes, again, we go like our motivations for opening up the app. Sometimes you're very like, I just had my coffee, I want to engage with the world. Yeah. Sometimes you're on the couch and I just want to see what people are making fun of this Bachelor contestant because she just made a fool of herself. So I think part of it might be like different app modes, like, yeah, give me funny mode, give me political mode or something, because right now the silos are partially of our own choosing because we follow people that think like us. And then also the algorithms, it'll give you whatever holds your attention. And it isn't always just people like you, because that'd be boring. Like, yeah, this politician's great. Cool. It's usually a little bit of like throwing rocks at the other side. Cause like, yeah, then you get that schadenfreude, like, yeah, we get to make fun of somebody bad. So it's a weird, I mean, you use the word paradox a lot. There's a tension between like engaging in a way that's like edifying and builds myself up, that I grow. But then sometimes you're not in the mood for that. Sometimes I just want to see cat video, Yeah.
Jean,
The only thing everybody can agree on now, cat videos rock.
And Dolly Parton. America can agree on Dolly Parton.
Yeah.
Says the man in Knoxville now. So this is really helpful. So I really think that adds a lot of really great context. I wonder if now maybe we sort of shift a little bit to maybe the design side, we'll say. Matt, I know you work in a place where maybe people are going to be thinking about these things from the creation angle. And I know you work with students a lot. So with these various sort of social and interpersonal impacts and generational differences, how aware do you feel like students are about these issues? I mean, you mentioned there are a couple that they very much seem aware of. And then another one, this is maybe a little bit harder. How do you think about the technologist's responsibility to care about the impact of their technology on social goods? So is that something that is broached in the classroom ever? And if so, what does that conversation look like?
So number two, like, can big tech police itself? Like, any system rooted in capitalism is inherently gonna, like, we gotta scale up and make more money, otherwise we die. So there needs to be some kind of regulation, but I don't know. That's like beyond my pay grade. But students are aware when you ask. I'm sure Jean's had the same experience. Like, it's easy for those of us that are older, and I'm a Zennial, so I'm in between. Like, I'm the Gen Z, like nobody cares about me, but I'm also top end millennial, so I still have some of those habits. But it's easy. I'm sure we all do this when you see a group of people that are younger than you. You're like, these kids in their phones, man, technology ruined them. Like, back in my day, we wouldn't. Like, no, if they would have had smartphones when I was in school, I wouldn't be able to have any job, because there'd be so many awful photos and stories and videos of me doing horrible things. So the students know. And I asked this question yesterday in my class. The weather was nice. We're sitting outside. It was very collegial. And everyone, each friend group has their own. Some people said, yeah, the sign, Jean, you said this in your book, that a sign of respect is taking my phone and turning it, face down, like silent mode. That's my way of communicating to you. Hey, I'm here, I'm present. One girl said for Lent, she is charging her phone downstairs. Because again, like, there's things we know we should do, but we don't always do, like keeping our phone charged not in our room, use an old school, beep, beep alarm clock. She says she's been doing that, and she's like, I've never slept better in my life. It's amazing. When I get up to pee, I don't accidentally lose 20 minutes on Facebook or something. So the students know, I think they feel the pull that we're talking about, which is, I know this isn't, the apps are there, they're easy to use. It is kind of real life. It can enhance real life if I use it in the right amount, like keep it in its proper place. But then it's really easy to go down the rabbit trail and get sucked into.
Yeah, that sleep thing is enormous. I always tell people, if you just want to follow one rule, if you can't handle a whole list, no phone in the bedroom after lights out. And then they say, yeah, but wait, my phone's my alarm clock. I have some advice for you. Buy an alarm clock. You can buy it on Amazon on your phone, and then put your phone away and get a good night's sleep.
Or if you're still techie, my Apple Watch, it vibrates at 6:30 a.m. It's like an angel's just shaking my hand, getting me out of bed. It's wonderful. It's so peaceful.
And I love that point. And I do want to I've come back to the question of practices in just a moment. Ways that we can sort of build in good rhythms of wise use, rather than sort of full-on rejection or full-on embrace. I do have one more sort of broader question that I was curious about as I was thinking about our having this conversation online on Zoom, which is something that we wouldn't typically do at Anselm House. Normally we would invite you both to the university, we'd host you, we'd have a lecture and a discussion, and but here we are. We're all on our computers and doing it this way. This is, of course, due to the COVID-19 pandemic and our sort of societal response to it. Is there any research, or do you have any sort of perspective on what the likely sort of impact of digital acceleration might be? Thinking about the ways in which, I mean, we can't look into the future with digital tech because things move so quickly, but just looking at what's happened during the COVID-19 pandemic over the last year, what are we seeing that might give us a clue about what direction we're going in terms of the impact of these technologies on our well-being?
It's going to be really interesting, and I hate predicting the future, but it's fun to hypothesize. It could go either way. I mean, people could be like, okay, I'm still going to be really cautious. I don't really want to go out. I don't really want to see people. I don't want to go to a bar. And then on the other hand, it could be like the roaring 20s of like, thank God we're finally out of our houses. Let's get rid of these phones. I mean, not really completely, but still, let's be with each other in a way that we haven't been able to do in, what's going to end up being like, what, a year and a half? I don't know. I don't know which way it's going to go. I'm going to be along for the ride watching.
Yeah, I know which way I hope it'll go. And I think, yeah, again, it depends on the person, how thoughtful, how deliberate they are. I'm sure some very uncritical, unreflective people will just be like, oh, I can go to the club again, cool, and go right back to life as it was in 2019. Hopefully, most of us will have a greater appreciation for the things we didn't have. And so we can enter back into whatever the new normal is going to be. And I mean, ideally holding both, holding our new gratitude for like, wow, going to a concert, going to a football game, gee whiz, but also keeping in mind the things we learned about ourselves, about our house, our spouse, our roommate, like whatever. Yeah. So, I mean, I'm an optimist most of the time. So I'd like to think that it'll be a better world. I mean, COVID accelerated trends that were happening anyway.
Yeah.
Jean, I noticed a recent paper you were on with the Institute for Family Studies that I found was really interesting here that talked about depression in young people. I wonder if you might share what you found in that paper. It was a little bit unexpected, the sort of results that you came with.
Yeah, so I work with these big surveys of teens, but the one I work with the most often had completed its data collection in 2020 before the pandemic started. So that means we wouldn't have, during or post-pandemic data till this year. And then it takes a year and a half for them to release it. I'm not that patient. I wanted to know what was happening with teens more immediately. So yeah, Institute for Family Studies and the Wheatley Institution funded a study we had a national survey company to get same age groups, 8th graders, 10th graders, and 12th graders in, it was late spring, early summer of 2020. And we looked at lots of stuff. The biggest surprise was, in terms of happiness and mental health, teens didn't look all that different from the 2018 data. And in terms of depression and loneliness, they were actually a little less depressed and lonely. I mean, I was genuinely shocked. I really didn't expect that. Then I got deeper into some of the questions we asked, and it made a little more sense. A lot more teens were getting enough sleep at night, which makes sense. They didn't have to get up at 6:30 to get on a bus and go to school, starting at 7:30 or 8. They were staying at home, and then often online school was even starting a little later. So that makes a big difference. And 2/3 of the teens in the survey also said that they felt their families had become closer since the pandemic started. So there was that more family time might have been beneficial too. So I think some of those factors may have blunted the impact. Now, those are somewhat tentative conclusions because the data wasn't collected in exactly the same way. We got the same age groups, we got it nationally representative, but the Monitoring the Future survey, they're filling it out at school. And in this case, they were filling it out online after getting a parent's permission. It's a little different. So even though we got the same groups, it's not exactly the same kids. So I'm still, waiting very impatiently for that Monitoring the Future data to come out for 2021, but it's going to be a while. So this is what we have to go on at the moment, which is good news. It's encouraging that we didn't get a big uptick in problems among teens. That's
right. Yeah, I found that really encouraging as well, and also very surprising. So super interesting. I want to shift, I suppose, now a little bit. We've talked a little bit about this, but to the perspective of students maybe in our own community. Anselm House is a Center for Christian Study. We have undergraduate and graduate students that are involved in our community. We like to think a lot about college as a time for intellectual formation, but also sort of character formation and spiritual formation as well, and how those things interact with each other. And I'd be curious to hear you talk a little bit about maybe how you think that technology plays into these things. I know, Matt, you've talked in the past about being on the road to being a pastor and then realizing that it's actually this thing in people's phones that's going to impact them more than even the most successful pastors can do on any Sunday morning. And so that kind of helped you set in your direction. I guess for both of you, I'm curious to hear you talk about what, in terms of using technology well, what virtues do you think we need to have to do this well? And what practices might we need to develop in order to develop those virtues, or at least to mitigate the negative formation that we might otherwise have? And we've talked about some of those things.
I'll leave this one for you to go first, Matthew.
So technology or tools, and most tools are maybe have a bias, but they're not inherently valenced. Like, you can use a stick to poke a berry down from a tree or beat someone with it. I don't know why that violent example came to mind. I'm not a very violent person. So yeah, think about all the potential apps for your smartphone. You can have stuff to help you with productivity and like plan your day, learn new languages, like all the sum total of human knowledge you can access on through this device at any time. So the capacity for good and growth is really limited to only like your time and your attention. Or you can use apps to look at, again, silly things. Somebody said, "Are cat videos good?" Yeah, like, yes, cat videos are fine. If you're watching so many cat videos that you get fired from your job, then it's time to dial the cat videos back a little bit. So the potential for like true flourishing is there. We just have to be deliberate with how we use, with how much time we spend on our devices, what apps we're using. So when you say what virtues, like purposefulness, like self-discipline, again, deciding what I'm going to do with my phone before I pick it up or before I open up that app. The virtues, I think gratitude is something that I try to operate with, being grateful for the things that I do have in my life. That way, when I see something, my neighbor gets like a $200,000 boat, I can be a little jealous, but mostly I'm like, cool, man, good for him. Like, he worked hard, he gets to buy a boat. Yeah, so just thinking that they're not totally neutral. They have some bias, right? They want us to stay on. They have a goal in and of themselves, but being deliberate and discerning with how I'm spending my time. I'm sure we all, if you don't know this, if you have an iPhone, you can go to settings, battery, scroll down to battery usage. You can do it right now and see what you're spending most of your time on. Yeah, deciding ahead of time how we want to use these tools to help me get to what I want, so I keep them in my hand instead of me being in the grip of this tech.
Mm-hmm. I think that's great. I mean, that's the primary thing, is just to try to make the smartphone be a tool that you use, not that uses you. the other thing is, especially on social media, I think the virtue we could use more of is compassion. And the difficult thing is most people on social media are compassionate people. It's the small percentage of trolls who ruin it for everybody else. So even though I can say, well, let's all try to be compassionate online, you know, the people who really need to be compassionate are not going to listen to me or anybody else anyway. But I don't know, try to take their perspective of that troll and just think, you know, their life must be pretty crappy. So I'll practice some Christian forgiveness.
Mm-hmm. Living in your parents' basement at age 30 is rough. It's not easy.
Yeah, it sucks.
That's I mean, so I'm glad you mentioned compassion and forgiveness. Is sort of like my final question before we switch to the questions from the viewers. But it really has to do with sort of thinking Christianly about our social media use. So these are great general virtues to use, but are there sort of is there anything specifically that Christian faith or spirituality might offer into this conversation that might make a difference for us?
I'll give this.
I mean, there's a ton of, this is a silly answer, but there's so many like devotional, whatever apps. I think finding the right one, we attend non-denominational church online, but I found this, it's like a liturgy. It's like an Episcopal app because I used to work at Episcopal church. So while I'm making coffee in the morning, it does like a chant and then like reads me a verse, and then some person in a British accent asks me questions about how the gospel can inform my day. So that's like one thing that I find helpful. But again, it depends on like what works with your daily rhythms, how you can start or end your day in a way that's deliberate, that helps you feel closer to God, experience the presence of Jesus, whatever you want. There's tools to assist us in almost any way. We just have to know how we want to get there.
All right. Well, that was really helpful. I know that we're going to have more follow-up questions in the Q&A here. I didn't mention this earlier, but we do have a group of students gathered together to watch this online. And I believe that we might have one or two who might be willing to kick us off with questions. So I'm going to give the first question to the students that are at Anselm House. I can go ahead and ask them to unmute themselves. And here they are. So welcome to the discussion, the students, and who would like to kick us off with our questions?
I can go first.
Why don't you give us your name and then state your question?
Yeah, my name is Holiday, and I have a question for both of our panelists. How has this information and research you found, if you have kids, how has it influenced how you parent your children?
All right, so I've got 3 kids. They're 14, 11, and 9. I have a graph in my book in iGen where it looks at all the different ways, you know, you can spend your time outside of school or work, stuff you do in leisure time. And as I was putting this together, I realized all the stuff that involved a screen was correlated with unhappiness, and all the stuff that didn't involve a screen went the other way, correlated with happiness. And after I made that graph, I literally pushed back from my desk, took my kids' Kindles and shoved them in a dresser drawer. And they were pretty young at the time. But, you know, we gotten them, those Kindles, thinking, you know, we'll put a strict limit on the amount of time they can spend on videos, but it has this huge library of books and other stuff that they can do. You think they ever used it to read books? They never used it to read books. After their half an hour or hour of video time was up, it was like it was a brick to them, and they just walked away from it. And I was like, well, you know, I'm cool with them watching TV and movies and I love cat videos. My youngest and I watch cat videos. Love it, right? We're going to do that. That's great. But for them having their own individual device and having it for an hour a day, I'm like, well, the easiest way to cut back is just let's get rid of those, except for road trips. Road trips and airplanes, you're allowed to do whatever you want. But it worked. So they started like playing outside a little bit more. They would do obstacle courses. They'd fight more, but I told myself they were learning social skills. So it did make things a little bit harder, but they didn't fight it. I thought they would be like, where's my Kindle? What happened to it? And fight with me. They barely noticed. It was bizarre. So that was one thing. And then my oldest is 14, doesn't have a phone yet. She doesn't want one. So that made it easier. And we'll get her one eventually. But, you know, she had a bad experience with somebody else being on social media and wanting to post a video for her when she was 9 years old. And so she has no interest in social media because she had that negative experience with somebody else's account so early on. So we'll see what happens with the other two. But so far, you know, yeah, she watches TikTok videos on her laptop and communicates with her friends using our phones and tablets and stuff. But she doesn't have her own and hasn't felt like she's needed it yet.
So that, I agree with all that. My oldest is only 6, so we're not there yet, but they did give in Knox County, they gave all kindergartners Chromebooks at the start of the year. So at this point, the games are all learning. She has no choice. All the games are like, you make Mario jump, and then is this verb in the past or present tense? Like, oh crap, all right, then you jump again. But to speak to what Jean was saying, yeah, I mean, screen time limits, it's theoretical, but when you're pressed, right, when you're like home alone and like I had a blowout diaper or something, then it's like, yeah, go watch Dory for the 10th time in 2 days. I don't care. But the thing that I think about, like,
Dora, Matthew.
Oh.
Or do you mean the movie Dory?
Yes.
Sorry.
Finding Nemo and Finding Dory back to back.
Okay. Just want to make sure we were on the same page.
Yeah, we haven't seen the Explorer yet. But zooming up, one thing that I think about is, and this applies to us too, not just to kids, even though the question was about kids. I think we need to be, it's good to be bored now and then. We need time to be bored. So when I tell them no, it's like, but I want to go, you know, and then there's like 60 seconds of bad attitude and like wringing their hands. And then, like all of us, the imagination kicks into another gear. And then before long, she's playing horsey with like a pillow and a doll. That's where like my best writing ideas come, when I'm running. So after 30 minutes, when your brain shifts into this like next gear. So I think it's good for humans to be bored for a little bit and see what comes on the other side of that boredom.
That's great. Seems really wise. Do we have another question from the Anselm House student? So you want to offer? Go ahead, Levi.
So we talked a bit earlier about sort of FOMO chain, where you fear missing out of social media, and then seeing other people do things on social media, you further miss out. So do you think that it's possible that what you consume on social media contributes to that FOMO? So like maybe if you're consuming information or seeing other people's vacations or something like that, I guess is it possible to go on social media without getting this FOMO that contributes to loneliness? Any thoughts on that?
I mean, the way most people use it, it does seem to encourage that type of social comparison. Even something like Twitter, which is, you know, most people use for news, people put personal stuff on there and you can still be like, oh man, that isn't me. It just seems to be almost baked into it. I mean, I think you can maybe use like Google News or Apple News, but social media itself, it's kind of built for that.
Yes, even though we all know that, you know, like, oh, throwback post, my vacation last year, like this person's posting a picture of vacation they did 2 years ago, and I still feel it at the back, oh, Cabo, so warm right now. So yes, it's possible to not compare yourself, but it takes time, I think, because a lot of times our habits can shape us and we become what we behold. So if we're always looking and feeling this feeling, then it can continue to stoke that. But I think what's funny is a lot of times we're used to seeing the glossy, pretty, polished like filter, But what we're drawn to really is authenticity. We like people that share real. I think now we're seeing influencers get, instead of the Kardashian, like, you know, polished, we're seeing the influencers who are like, yeah, I can look good, but if I pull my yoga pants down, you see the roll of fat, and people are like, yes, that's real. I know when I share on Twitter, like, hey, I published an article, it'll be like 10 likes, 1 comment. When I share, I had a brutal reviewer told me that I should drop out, you know, then I get like 30 likes, which of not even to say that, of course, what does that do to me? Because that conditions me to do the thing that gets more likes. But I think we're attracted to the real and stuff that we sense is more authentic and real. So however you can structure your own habits and attitude towards social media. Yeah.
It's great. It's great. Thank you for those great questions. We've got some coming in from the viewers online. I'd like to start with one that is framed in terms of cancel culture. But I think, you know, that's a really sort of fraught term. It maybe isn't always clear we know what we're talking about when we talk about it. But I think one of the aspects behind it has to do with really with the way our civic conversations get filtered through social media in certain ways that maybe are not very productive for advancing conversation, but are very productive for shutting down certain conversations. Or I think that's sort of the idea behind the question. It's sort of, I wonder if maybe you guys could talk a little bit about the role of shame in social media. And then also, if you have any recommendations for productive dialogue rather than sort of outrage cycle that we often see in social media.
One thing that I think, I'll keep this short, Gene, because you probably have more on this. It's a good reminder that like their businesses. So just like a restaurant could say, no shirt, no shoes, no service. And if you don't like it, you go to another restaurant. If I say something, if I don't like what's happening, like Zuckerberg can kick me off Facebook for no reason because it's his company. He can do whatever he wants. It's a bit, again, we like this, these are all capitalist systems. That's how it works. So yeah, they can do anything they want, and we're the product, and yeah, we can build another. Well, yeah, that's another rabbit trail.
I think just to at least try to give people the benefit of the doubt sometimes. And it's hard because it is a shame thing that, yep, sometimes I think it's clear to most people, yeah, that was a really dumb thing you did or said, but there's this vast gray area. And a lot of times it's something that's misinterpreted in one way or another. And it's hard because, you know, who's to say whether this is something we need to pile on, you know, that is an opinion, and then it gets out of hand really, really quickly. But that's how the dynamic works. I mean, when you're interacting with people in person, as you get to know them, you build up a level of trust. And with social media, that's not there. You know, it's just these random people who you haven't met before, and the assumption so quickly with somebody you don't know is to not give the benefit of the doubt, to not trust them, and immediately assume bad intent. And that makes it difficult. Which
I think goes back to, we talked about trade-offs, like, yes, apps are very convenient. So what am I gaining? What am I losing? I can now stay in touch with everyone who I didn't care about in high school. Awesome. What am I losing? Maybe I'm losing a more meaningful depth conversation with someone who does matter to me, who does encourage, pour into me for the sake of these shallow interactions. So social media, it's a trade-off. I get to hear, it's like overhearing bits of this conversation, but I lose the face-to-face, where in person, if I said, Jean, I don't like you, if I said something mean, I could see in her face, right? The nonverbal, she gets sad. That would cultivate empathy in me. I'm sorry, I didn't mean it. You know, what we gain in convenience, we lose sometimes in empathy.
And that's the thing on social media. You can't see, it doesn't even feel like a real person because it's just a name on a screen. It's text on a screen. And, you know, I think it's mostly the minority of people, the trolls, but still, you know, it's very tempting to just shoot off that comment and not fully realize there's another person on the end of it.
Mm-hmm. And at least for adults, we can usually hold stuff in perspective, like, oh, I said something mean. Yeah, I deserve to get like yelled at for that, or whatever. I double down. I'm like, no, I'm gonna say it again. But in iGen, some of the heartbreaking stuff is like the bullying in high school and middle school before, because when you're 15, the most important opinions to you are those of your peers. So if they say something mean, it's just like your world's ending. Even if they didn't mean it, right? Maybe it was a joke, a one-off text and screenshot. So yeah.
It's great. It's great. Yeah, it occurs to me that a lot of this is sort of baked in too. It was the decision. Cal Newport had something that he wrote recently that I read that talked about the decision to shift these social media platforms to sort of instant feedback, likes, and those sorts of things, and how that sort of set the trajectory, because what you're rewarded for is cleverness. And that's the thing that sort of gives you the most sort of immediate feedback, is what can I say that will get the most likes? That's not the thing that generally advances conversation necessarily.
Yeah, can you imagine somebody, oh, we found Travis tweeted something awful in high school. Great, let's pile on. You're an idiot, you're bad. Can you imagine jumping in and be like, hi, Travis, like, I think you've grown since then. Like, you've grown as a person. You're not the same person you were. It would be just even seeing that one attempt at empathy in the middle of like a bunch of, you know, finger wagging, just seems like out of place. Or it wouldn't generate the kind of cash you're talking about.
So we've been talking a lot about the drawbacks. Just naturally, I think it's the thing that we feel, and I read somewhere that millennials are maybe I read this in iGen, I don't remember, but millennials are the most sort of suspicious generation about things like targeted advertising and the way that their technology interacts with them, whereas iGen typically are not. So there's, you know, I'm a millennial and Matt's a zillennial, I guess, or not a zillennial, I don't know, how do you say that? But maybe shifting to, you know, are there ways that you can see that smartphones and social media are helping us to communicate in better ways than other forms of communication? Are there things that really should be affirmed about them?
I mean, they let people find other people like them. Mm-hmm. I mean, if you're an LGBT kid in a small town, you can find other people who are like you, and that didn't used to be possible, and that's fantastic. So that's just one example. I mean, if you have an obscure interest or, you know, a certain medical condition or whatever, you can connect with people like you. And no, it's not as good as face-to-face, but if you're isolated in one way or another, it can be really good for that, as long as it doesn't take over, you know, the rest of your life and your other relationships. But it's great for that.
Yeah, I think the phrase, and this is from a Andy Crouch book, but are you keeping it in its proper place? So the thing that I think about, am I using this to supplement real world relationships or supplant or replace them? So most of my research is done with college or 20s and 30s. And a lot of it comes down to social media is in the eye of the beholder. So if you think it's intimate, if I'm using this to connect with people that I know in the real world, then yeah, it's good. In that case, social media use and happiness can go up. But if I don't think it's intimate, if it's not connecting me with other people front IRL in real life, then I'm using it for the comparison, for the jealousy, envy. It's cultivating a lot of negative things in me, in which case social media use and loneliness would go up.
One of our people in the chat was offering that she's part of a group that's starting a church plant, and they're thinking about the social media use of the church as a way of, the church wants to use social media because it's where people are, and so they want to push into social media and digital technology, but at the same time recognizing the complexity of the situation and the way in which our tools sometimes have affordances or have directions that lead us in ways that we don't necessarily choose. This is a little bit different than the question of the individual college student trying to use social media wisely. How do you think about an institution like the church leaning into social media and digital technology and things that they might want to think about?
All you, Matthew.
That's a really good question. I'm thinking there's like one or two apps that I have. The only reason I have them is because our small group uses them to communicate. So like GroupMe or Telegram or one of those, there's so many different messaging apps. And whenever I see, well, I don't see notifications because I turn notifications off because we should all have them off. But when I see it, I'm like, oh, I guess that's right. It's Saturday. We're making small group plans for tomorrow. As you asked the question, I was thinking of how great tech was for churches in the pandemic, because you could keep attending church and meeting and face-to-face, there was some sense of community that was still there. And I think it felt a lot more like community if it was already established, kind of saying what I just said. If you were already going in person, then meeting online feels different, because it feels like I know what it's like to be in the building, to hug that person, to shake that hand. Whereas if you're attending a new church online, it just feels like you're watching a movie. But that doesn't really answer the question. I wonder about like how different apps are structured for, what does a Christ Facebook look like, and how would that be used? If it violates like one of the commandments, it's like you can thumbs down it or something. I don't know. That's a good question.
One of the questions wanted you to follow up, Matt. We have time for maybe one or two, but wanted you to follow up on your quick comment on the film, The Social Dilemma. Specifically, they were wondering what problematic aspects you saw in that film, or what maybe a critical viewing of the film might bring into view.
I'm sure Jean has thoughts on this too. The net result effect of The Social Dilemma was great. It got us to think more critically about our social media usage. So in that sense, I'm glad it was made. If you get real nerdy and do a deep dive into it, then you would say they had to flatten stuff into a binary, like that person was all evil, that person's all good. This tech is all evil, that tech's all good. They interviewed Jaron Landy, like some people who are hardcore, who are all the way like, I gave up all social media, you should too, which is for some people, that's the best option. But for most of us that need to live with this in a way where we can hold it in balance with a healthy, flourishing life, whatever that looks like, whether it's a lot of in-person engagement or not. They flattened a lot. It's a lot of gray area and a lot of it depenses, but they had to make it all black and white with villains and heroes to get you to watch the whole thing. So I understand. Jean, I'm sure you have thoughts on this too. I'm sure you had lots of conversations when this came out.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is the perpetual problem with translating social science or science overall into something that people will watch and consume. And because when you look at it, a little bit of social media is not all bad. For teen girls, maybe, but outside of that, people who are on social media an hour, even 2 hours a day, doing fine. It's those really high levels of use that have a really strong link to depression and other negative outcomes. And, it's true for other things too. But, there's a reason to single out social media. When you look at those same data sets, you don't get as strong of a link to depression with watching videos or gaming. Now, neither one of those is good when you're doing it 10 hours a day either, but 4 hours of TV or 4 hours of gaming doesn't look as connected to depression as, say, 4 hours of social media. So not all screen time is created equal. And so in singling out, there's a reason they're singling that out. It does seem, maybe because it's not in real time, it's not as interactive, it's more curated. There just seems to be more potential for negativity, toxicity, et cetera, compared to other mediums. Like, texting is more personal. Video chat, like we're doing now, is in real time. We can see each other's faces. We can have a conversation. No, it's not as good as being there, but it's a lot closer than, passively scrolling through Instagram. So there are those gradations, but I get why they had to simplify it.
I still think of that scene where it's the teen boy, the one that becomes like, goes down like the alt-right, the white nationalist thing in the movie. Whenever they're like, there's the dark evil people in the room, it's like, he's about to log off. Quick, hit him with something else. Whenever I see a random ad, I'm like, are there people in a room? Is this what the algorithm is like, deciding this for me? The thing, since we're getting near the end, the metaphor that I think is the best that I've come up with is that our media diet, social media for the most part, is like carbs or candy, not evil in and of themselves. But for most of us, it shouldn't be the core. It shouldn't be like the foundation of the pyramid. So we all have like the really skinny friend that can eat whatever they want. Fine. Some people can be on social media a lot. Not a big deal. Yeah, not no. But for a lot of us, like just like you are mindful of your food diet. Be mindful of your media diet, and be deliberate about helping ensure that it's helping you reach your goals.
Social media is Girl Scout cookies.
Yeah. Thin mints and Samoas.
Tag-alongs. Otherwise known as peanut butter patties. I don't know. The names vary from one region to another. So.
Well, let me just go ahead and thank you both. Before I sort of completely conclude, I do have a few brief announcements for those who are with us online. So first of all, I want to let you know that you'll be receiving an invitation to complete a brief survey as you end this call when you log off. You also can access the survey in the chat. There's a link there for it. We just ask that you would consider filling out that survey. It's very helpful for us to incentivize you. 3 random survey participants will be given a copy of Jean's book, iGen. So if you fill out the survey, you will qualify for that. Second, I wanted to let you know that if you're interested in supporting Anselm House, we invite you to consider becoming a sustaining partner. We have a matching gift situation for anybody who becomes a first-time giver, sustaining giver, and also all first-time givers will also be given a copy of Jean's book as a sign of our gratitude. And then finally, you can tell we like Jean's book a lot. And then you can access information in the chat about that as well. And then finally, I just invite anybody who's interested to join us for our next online forum. It's going to be this coming Tuesday at 7 p.m. Central. It will be called Thinking with Soren Kierkegaard about anxiety, depression, and despair as part of our Thinking with the Saints series with Dr. Gordon Marino, who's professor of philosophy at St. Olaf College. So if you're interested in that, welcome you to join us for that. And finally, once again, let me thank you, Jean, and thank you, Matt, for a really stimulating discussion, and really appreciate your time.